Blair Lee, Maryland political analyst, Gazette columnist. He joins us right now. Let's get right to it. How long will the rain tax survive this session, Blair Lee? I've got to think with the elections in 2014 coming up that lawmakers would like to see that go away.
Yeah, don't forget, it's election year, so you will see lots of posturing on things like the rain tax. However, the rain tax will not be repealed. This is the tax, don't forget, that was imposed on the 10 biggest jurisdictions in Maryland where homeowners and businesses, so-called impervious surfaces, anything that causes rain to flow off those surfaces and add to runoff that pollutes the bay, is being taxed by these 10 jurisdictions. Of course, the lawmakers exempted state property, but did extend the ban or extend the tax to nonprofits and religious buildings. So what you're going to see is not a repeal, perhaps a delay. Most probably you're going to see a softening, some kind of relief for religious buildings and for nonprofits, and they may even extend the tax to government property.
But, you know, that's one of those things that just sounds silly. I mean, because I have the temerity to have a driveway, I'm going to be taxed. And you know, I'm sort of reminded about that Beatles lyric called from the song Taxman. That in Maryland, it's almost as if you drive the car, they'll tax the street. If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. It's like everything in the state of Maryland gets taxed. And I'm getting the sense that a lot of people in the state of Maryland, where before they have never really rebelled against the Democratic leadership, are really getting pretty fed up with this stuff.
Well, now, you're exactly right, because this has been the straw, the rain tax, that sort of broke the camel's back. You could say, gosh, what next? Are they going to tax the flushing of the toilets? Well, guess what? We already
they do that. Yeah.
We have a flush tax in Maryland. I mean, there isn't much left to tax. In the last 7 years in Maryland, there have been 40 tax and fee increases.
Wow.
The Maryland taxpayers are now paying, are you ready for this, $3.1 billion a year more in taxes than back in 2006.
But has it reached the point in the state of Maryland where people have said, all right, you know what, we can't have one-party rule in this state anymore?
Well, you would think so, but here, think about this for a second. In 2010, that was the great Tea Party backlash reaction nationwide. As President Obama said, he took a shellacking in 2010. Republicans won back Congress. They won 63 seats in Congress, and we have this gridlock government because of this revolt of the taxpayers nationwide, except in Maryland. Maryland is a blue state. We're a pro-government state. We're a tax and spend state. The entire Tea Party reaction bypassed Maryland. That emboldened all the Maryland incumbents who got reelected. They think they have a mandate to keep on taxing and spending. At some point, they'll go too far. The rain tax may be that point.
All right. Blair Lee joins us. He's, of course, a political analyst focusing on Maryland. And you just mentioned 2010 and how the national tide was quite different than what happened in Maryland. Well, the national tide for 2014, once again, is focusing on the failure of Obamacare, the rollout with the exchanges there via healthcare.gov. Maryland has its own problems with its health exchange. How is that going to loom, especially with regard to the gubernatorial primaries, because both major Democratic candidates are on opposite sides of this issue?
I'm guessing that President Obama every morning wakes up and says, thank God for Maryland, because Maryland's Obamacare website is one of the worst in the nation. It actually makes the federal website look good. In fact, Democratic Congressman John Delaney and others are proposing that Maryland scrap its $150 million Obamacare website and go ahead and use the federal website, even though it's flawed. It's not flawed as badly as the Maryland website.
You know it's bad when they're saying let's use Kathleen Sebelius' site instead of Maryland's. But how is that going to affect Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown's bid for the nomination?
That's a great question. It's one of the great dramas of this session is going to be the so-called investigation and placing of blame for this website fiasco in Maryland. When the website was not working back in October and November, the party line from Governor O'Malley and Lieutenant Governor Brown was, right now our attention is focused on fixing the website. We will place blame later on. Well, later on is now here, okay? I mean, of course, you couldn't multitask. You couldn't place blame and fix at the same time. So now blame placing is here. The Democrats that control the assembly, the leaders and the governor and all the rest, have all endorsed Anthony Brown, Lieutenant Governor Brown, who's running for governor. Brown was the guy in charge of the Maryland website. So you watch the so-called investigation, you're going to see a complete whitewash of Anthony Brown. He will not be blamed. He will somehow be able to avoid any blame, and it's all because of gubernatorial politics.
All right, the sound you just heard is Doug Gansler's head exploding somewhere on the Beltway in a speeding trooper car, by the way.
They'll probably figure out some way to blame Gansler.
Yeah.
Is Gansler toast, by the way?
I don't think so. It's much too early. Gansler is a very skilled politician. We're going to find out the difference between fact and fiction in about 5 or 6 days, when all of these candidates have to fess up how much money they've really raised and how much money they have in the bank. The so-called disclosure of fundraising is due in mid-January, and that's going to separate the fakers from the guys who are for real. Look for Gansler to have more money, which he will spend on television. Maryland voters are famous for not focusing in until about 10 days before the election.
Real fast, Blair Lee, we're almost out of time, but Senate President Mike Miller of Calvert, he came out in the Washington Post just this week and said that he favors the legalization and taxation of marijuana. Is that going to have any legs this session?
This is my candidate for the great wild card issue of this session. I think legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes, just like Colorado and Washington, may be the sleeper of this session for a number of reasons. First of all, you have liberal Democrats running for re-election in Democratic primaries. Democratic voters in the polls favor legalizing marijuana. Likewise, African-American and liberal lawmakers view it as a civil rights issue because criminalization is viewed as racially biased. Miller wants it because of the money, just like slots and casinos.
Yep.
This may end up on O'Malley's desk, legalizing marijuana, and that may cause him some real heartache because he has to figure out, will that make him look good in 2016 when he wants to
run for president?
Yeah.
Blair Lee, always good to have you. Thank you, sir.
Good stuff, Blair.